November 15th, 1962. Marcus Holloway watched 8 of his fellow FBI agents die in a sugarcane field outside Havana. The mission was simple: eliminate Fidel Castro. The execution was a bloodbath. Marcus was the only one who made it back to American soil. For 61 years, he told the same story to his debriefers, his wife, his daughter. Castro's security was too tight. Intelligence was bad. They walked into a trap. Every word was a lie. What Marcus discovered in those final moments in Cuba, before bullets started flying and good men started dying, changed everything. The message Castro whispered to him as his team lay bleeding wasn't a threat. It was a confession that could topple governments. For 6 decades, Marcus kept that secret buried. Until yesterday, when someone delivered his dead partner's badge to his front door. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Holloway's hands hadn't shaken like this since 1962. The bronze FBI badge lay on his kitchen table like a piece of evidence from a crime scene he'd spent 61 years trying to forget. Agent Timothy Chen's badge. Tim, who'd taken 3 rounds to the chest in that godforsaken sugarcane field and bled out while whispering his wife's name. The package had arrived with yesterday's mail, wrapped in brown paper with no return address, just his name written in block letters and a postmark from Miami. Inside, nestled in tissue paper like a funeral flower, was the badge he'd watched Cuban soil swallow when they buried Tim in an unmarked grave outside Havana. Marcus picked up the badge with trembling fingers, feeling the familiar weight of government-issued metal. The serial number was correct, even the small dent near the eagle's wing, damage from when Tim dropped it during training at Quantico. This wasn't a replica. Someone had dug up his partner. The grandfather clock in his hallway chimed 6 times, its sound echoing through the modest farmhouse he'd called home for 2 decades. Sarah would be here soon for their weekly dinner, probably carrying another article she'd written for the Washington Tribune, and that concerned expression she wore whenever she talked about her latest investigation. His daughter had inherited her mother's relentless curiosity and his own stubborn refusal to let sleeping dogs lie. Marcus walked to the window overlooking his backyard, where evening shadows stretched across the vegetable garden Linda had planted before the cancer took her. The tomatoes were dying now, frost-bitten and forgotten. Like everything else in his life, he'd let them wither rather than face the memory of her hands in the soil, laughing as she explained which plants needed more water. 3 years since the funeral. 3 years of microwave dinners and reruns on the History Channel. 3 years of being just another retired teacher in Millbrook, Virginia, population 847. His neighbors knew him as the soft-spoken man who taught their kids about the Revolutionary War and drove the same pickup truck to the grocery store every Tuesday. They had no idea that Marcus Holloway had once killed 13 people with his bare hands and lived to tell about it. Well, not tell about it exactly. The sound of gravel crunching in his driveway pulled Marcus from his thoughts. Sarah's Honda Civic appeared around the bend, her headlights cutting through the November dusk. He quickly slipped Tim's badge into his shirt pocket, feeling the metal press against his ribs like an old wound. The front door burst open without ceremony. "Dad? You better not be eating cereal for dinner again." Sarah's voice carried the mock authority of a daughter who'd appointed herself his caretaker. At 32, she looked so much like Linda it sometimes took his breath away. Same auburn hair, same green eyes that missed nothing. "Kitchen," he called back, forcing normalcy into his voice. "Made your favorite." Sarah appeared in the doorway, holding a bottle of wine, and wearing the navy blazer she reserved for serious interviews. Her smile faltered when she saw his face. "You look like hell. Everything okay?" "Long day. Retirement's harder than they advertise." The lie came easily after 61 years of practice. Marcus gestured toward the stove where a pot of beef stew was simmering. "How was work?" "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about." Sarah set the wine on the counter and pulled out her phone. "I'm working on something big. Really big. Remember that source I mentioned last month? The one with connections to historical CIA operations?" The badge in Marcus's pocket seemed to burn against his chest. Sarah! He gave me documents, Dad. Classified stuff from the 60s. There was this operation called Mongoose, some kind of assassination attempt against Castro that went sideways. 10 agents went in. Only one came back. Her eyes lit up with the enthusiasm that had made her one of Washington's most feared investigative journalists. The survivor's identity was classified, but I think I can find him. This could be the story that finally gets me that Pulitzer. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. Sarah was still talking, showing him photocopied documents on her phone, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. He recognized the mission briefing headers, the classification stamps, even his own signature on a document he'd thought was destroyed decades ago. The thing is, Sarah continued, I think the official story is bullshit. My source says there was something else going on, something that got 8 good agents killed. Drop it. The words came out harder than Marcus intended. Sarah looked up, surprised. What? Drop the story. Find something else to investigate. Marcus turned away from her, gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles went white. Some secrets are buried for good reasons. In the reflection of the kitchen window, he watched his daughter's face change from confusion to the stubborn determination he knew too well. The same expression Linda used to get when she'd decided to fight him on something. Since when do you want me to stop investigating corruption? Since your investigation is going to get you killed, sweetheart. But Marcus couldn't say that. Instead, he turned around and smiled the same lying smile he'd been perfecting since 1962. Since when do I want you to stop? Marcus let the question hang in the air between them, tasting the bitter irony. He'd spent 23 years encouraging Sarah's curiosity, praising every school project where she dug deeper than her classmates, beaming with pride when she'd won her first journalism award. Now that same relentless drive was pointing her toward a truth that would destroy them both. You're right, he said finally. I'm sorry. Just tired, I guess. But Sarah's reporter instincts were already engaged. She studied his face the way she probably studied lying politicians, searching for the tell that would crack his story wide open. Dad, you've never once told me to back down from a story. When I was investigating the water contamination in Millbrook, you helped me research county records. When I went after Senator Morrison's defense contracts, you were the one who taught me how to follow the money trail. The stew began to bubble on the stove, filling the silence with domestic normalcy. Marcus moved to stir it, grateful for something to do with his hands. The wooden spoon Linda had carved from an old apple tree, another memory he'd tried to bury. Everything in this house was a ghost. This is different, he said, not trusting himself to look at her. How? Because this time you're hunting me. Political corruption, environmental cover-ups, that's one thing. But Cold War operations? That's dangerous territory, Sarah. People who work those missions, they're still alive, still connected. They don't appreciate journalists digging up old graves. Sarah moved closer, and he could smell her perfume, the same lavender scent Linda used to wear. His daughter had started wearing it after the funeral, probably without realizing. Another wound disguised as comfort. You sound like you know something about this. Her voice had shifted into interview mode, gentle but persistent. Operation Mongoose wasn't exactly common knowledge. Most people have never heard of it. Marcus kept stirring, watching the carrots tumble in the brown gravy. 23 years of teaching history, and he'd never once mentioned the missions he'd lived through. Ancient Rome, the Civil War, both world wars, safe subjects where his knowledge came from books instead of scars. I read the same books you do, he said. Cuba's been declassified for years. Not this deep. Not the operational details my source provided. Sarah pulled out a chair and sat down, settling in for a long conversation. She'd inherited that technique from Linda, too. Patient persistence until the truth came out. Dad, these documents show budget allocations, personnel files, even communication transcripts. Someone with serious access leaked this information. And they leaked it to me specifically. The wooden spoon snapped in Marcus's hand. Shit. He stared at the broken pieces, remembering Linda's hands shaping the wood, her laugh when he'd complained about store-bought utensils. Now even her memory was collateral damage in this war he'd thought was over. Here. Sarah was beside him instantly, taking the broken spoon, her fingers brushing his. "I'll get another one." While she rummaged through the kitchen drawer, Marcus watched her reflection in the dark window, auburn hair catching the overhead light, green eyes focused on helping him, the same fierce protectiveness that had driven her to journalism in the first place. She wanted to fix the world's problems, expose the truth, make sure justice prevailed. She had no idea that sometimes justice meant keeping secrets. Found one. Sarah held up a metal spoon, then noticed his expression. "Dad, you're scaring me. What's going on?" The badge pressed against his ribs like a promise, or a threat. Someone had sent it for a reason, probably the same someone feeding classified documents to his daughter. After 61 years of silence, Operation Mongoose was crawling out of its grave. "Nothing's going on," Marcus lied, taking the spoon. "Just don't want you getting in over your head." "I'm 32 years old. I've been getting in over my head professionally for a decade." Sarah returned to her chair, but her posture remained alert. Besides, this could be huge. Think about it. If there really was a cover-up, if 8 agents died to protect some bigger secret, that's a story that matters. That's the kind of truth people deserve to know. No, Marcus thought, stirring the stew with mechanical precision. It's the kind of truth that gets good people killed. The grandfather clock chimed again, marking another hour closer to whatever was coming. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows, carrying the smell of dying leaves and winter's approach. Soon, the first snow would cover Linda's forgotten garden, burying the tomatoes under a blanket of white forgiveness. Marcus wished it were that simple for secrets. "Promise me you'll be careful," he said, meeting his daughter's eyes for the first time since she'd mentioned Operation Mongoose. "Whatever you're chasing, just be careful." Sarah smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd caught something in his tone, some fragment of the fear he couldn't quite hide. "Always am, Dad. Always am." Another lie between them, as comfortable as the kitchen where they sat breaking bread and dancing around the truth that could destroy everything they had left. Marcus ladled the stew into bowls, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. Sarah had opened the wine, but neither of them had touched it. The conversation about Operation Mongoose hung in the air, unfinished business that his daughter wouldn't let die. She never did. "You know what's strange?" Sarah said, swirling the burgundy in her glass. "My source mentioned something else. Said there was a survivor who disappeared completely after debriefing. No pension records, no forwarding address, nothing. Like the government just erased him." Marcus's spoon clinked against the bowl. "People change their names, start over. Maybe he didn't want to be found. Or maybe someone wanted him forgotten." Sarah leaned forward, her investigative instincts in full bloom. "Think about it. If you're the only witness to something the agency wants buried, what happens to you? Do they relocate you? Buy your silence? Or—" The telephone rang. The sound cut through the kitchen like a gunshot, sharp and sudden in the November quiet. Marcus stared at the old rotary phone mounted on the wall, Linda's insistence on keeping something with character in their modern kitchen. It rang again, the brass bell echoing off the tile. "Probably Mrs. Henderson checking on you again," Sarah said with a smile. "That woman thinks you're wasting away without her casseroles." Marcus didn't move. The phone rang a third time. He hadn't given anyone this number in years. His cell phone was what people used. Sarah, the few colleagues who still kept in touch, the pharmacy for prescription reminders. The landline was just there, a ghost of domestic life he'd maintained out of habit. Fourth ring. "Dad?" Sarah was looking at him strangely. "You going to answer that?" Fifth ring. 6. Marcus stood slowly, his legs feeling suddenly unsteady. Tim's badge seemed to pulse against his chest with each metallic chime. He reached for the receiver, his hand hesitating just above the black plastic handle. 7 rings. 8. "Jesus, Dad. What's wrong with you?" Marcus lifted the phone to his ear. "Hello?" Static crackled on the line, the distant hiss of a connection traveling too far. Then a voice he'd prayed never to hear again, aged but unmistakable. "Hello, Marcus." The kitchen tilted. Marcus gripped the phone cord, watching his knuckles go white. 61 years collapsed into nothing. 1962 rushing back like floodwater, carrying the taste of Cuban tobacco and the sound of gunfire in sugarcane fields. Impossible, he whispered. Miss me, partner? Timothy Chen's voice was older now, rougher around the edges, but still carrying that slight accent he'd never quite lost despite being born in San Francisco. Tim, who'd bled out in Marcus's arms. Tim, whose badge was currently burning a hole in Marcus's pocket. Tim, who'd been dead for 61 years. Sarah, could you... Marcus turned toward his daughter, his voice barely functioning. Could you check on dessert? In the pantry? Sarah frowned but stood up. We don't have... Please. Something in his tone made her move. Marcus waited until he heard her footsteps in the hallway before speaking again. You're dead. I buried you myself. Soft laughter on the line, familiar and wrong. Did you? Or did you bury someone else in the dark while the revolutionaries were shooting at us? Marcus closed his eyes, but the memories came anyway. The confusion of that night, explosions lighting up the plantation house, bodies everywhere. He'd grabbed Tim's badge from what he'd thought was his partner's corpse, but the face had been, you son of a bitch. Language, Marcus. I've been watching your little domestic life, very touching, really. The grieving widower, the devoted father, teaching American history to children who'll never know what you did for their freedom. What do you want? Your daughter's gotten herself into some trouble, asking questions about things that should stay buried. Marcus's blood turned to ice. Through the doorway, he could hear Sarah moving around in the pantry, probably wondering what dessert she was supposed to be looking for. His beautiful, stubborn daughter, who'd inherited his sense of justice and her mother's inability to let things go. Stay away from her. That depends entirely on you, partner. See, someone's been very careless with classified documents. Someone's been feeding information to investigative journalists. And unfortunately, that trail leads right back to our little Cuban adventure. The phone cord was wrapped around Marcus's finger now, cutting off circulation. I never said anything. Not in 61 years. I know. You've been the perfect sleeper asset. But times change, Marcus. The agency has new priorities. And frankly, you've become a liability. Sarah's voice drifted from the pantry. Dad, there's no dessert in here, Tim continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. I'll be in touch soon. We have so much to catch up on. The line went dead. Marcus stood frozen, listening to the dial tone while his past and present collided like tectonic plates, reshaping everything he'd built in the aftermath. Marcus hung up the phone with trembling fingers, the dial tone's monotonous hum still echoing in his ears. The kitchen felt different now, smaller, exposed, like the walls had thinned between him and the watching world. Every shadow could hide surveillance. Every creak of the old house could signal someone moving closer. Dad? Sarah's voice from the pantry carried confusion and growing concern. There really isn't any dessert back here. Are you feeling okay? He forced his voice to work. I'm fine. Must have forgotten to pick some up. But fine was the last thing he was. Tim's voice had unlocked a floodgate of memories Marcus had spent decades cementing shut. The humid Cuban night muzzle flashes in the darkness. The sound of his own breathing as he'd crawled through cane fields with 8 dead men behind him. And Tim, Tim, who apparently hadn't been among them. Sarah emerged from the pantry, studying his face with those penetrating green eyes. Who was that on the phone? Wrong number. The lie tasted like copper pennies. Someone looking for directions. For 20 minutes? She glanced at the kitchen clock. Dad, you look like you've seen a ghost. Close enough. Marcus moved to the sink, needing something to do with his hands. The dinner dishes could wait until morning, but he began washing them anyway, scrubbing each bowl with methodical precision. Routine was armor. Domestic normalcy was camouflage. But Sarah wasn't buying it. She positioned herself where he couldn't avoid her gaze, arms crossed in the stance she'd perfected during teenage arguments. This is about the story, isn't it? About Operation Mongoose. Sarah. Someone's trying to scare you off, threaten you because I'm investigating. Her voice gained momentum, righteous anger building like a storm system. Well, they picked the wrong family. I'm not backing down from this. Marcus's hands stilled in the soapy water. Through the kitchen window he caught movement in his peripheral vision, just a shadow sliding between the trees that bordered his property. Could be a deer, could be Mrs. Henderson's cat, could be someone with a rifle scope and instructions to tie up loose ends. Maybe you should, he said quietly. What? Back down. Find another story. Marcus turned to face her, seeing Linda's stubborn determination reflected in their daughter's expression. The same look that had gotten his wife elected to the school board 3 times running, the same fierce protectiveness that made Sarah the kind of journalist politicians feared. This isn't some corrupt mayor or defense contractor, sweetheart. These are people who've been keeping secrets since before you were born. They have resources. They have reach. Sarah stepped closer, her reporter's instincts fully engaged now. You're talking like you know them. The badge felt like a brand against his ribs. Tim's voice echoed in his memory. We have so much to catch up on. 61 years of careful anonymity, of building a life so ordinary that no one would look twice. Teaching Revolutionary War battles while hiding his own war. Grading essays about democracy while protecting secrets that could topple governments. All of it unraveling because his daughter had inherited his inability to let injustice stand. I know enough, Marcus said. Enough to recognize when someone's in over their head. Like your survivor? Sarah's eyes lit with sudden understanding. Dad, you keep talking about this like it's personal. Like you know something about what really happened in Cuba. The shadow moved again outside, definitely too large to be an animal. Marcus's training kicked in automatically. Sight lines to exits, potential weapons within reach, how many seconds it would take to get Sarah behind solid cover. 23 years of teaching high school hadn't dulled those instincts. I know what happens to people who ask too many questions about classified operations, he said, moving toward the window. Just concerned father checking the weather, nothing more. And I know I can't lose you too. Sarah went very still. Two? Shit. The word had slipped out, carrying more weight than he'd intended. Marcus pressed his forehead against the cool glass, watching the tree line. No movement now, but that meant nothing. Good surveillance teams knew when to go static. Your mother, he said. I meant your mother. But Sarah was too smart for easy deflection. Mom died of cancer, Dad. That's not the same as... She stopped, understanding dawning across her face like sunrise. Unless it wasn't random. Unless someone wanted her silence too. Jesus Christ, Sarah. Listen to yourself. Marcus spun away from the window, fear making his voice sharp. Your mother had lymphoma. Bad genetics and worse luck. Not everything is a conspiracy. But this is. Sarah moved to the table where her phone lay beside the wine bottle, her fingers already reaching for it. My source was right. There's something here, something worth protecting with violence. And you know what it is? Don't. Marcus's voice carried a tone that made Sarah freeze mid-reach. Command voice. Honed in Cuban sugar fields and never quite forgotten. Don't make another call. Don't send another email. Don't do anything that puts you deeper in this hole. For a moment they stared at each other across the kitchen where he'd raised her, where Linda had taught her to bake cookies and Marcus had helped with homework. Domestic battlefield, with love and secrets warring for control. Outside, gravel crunched in the driveway. Blood turned to ice. The sound of tires on gravel sent him back 61 years to another driveway, another night when unexpected visitors brought death instead of dinner conversation. He moved to the window, pushing aside Linda's faded curtains with 2 fingers. A black sedan sat in his driveway, government issue and deliberately nondescript. The engine was still running, exhaust visible in the November cold. 2 figures in the front seat, too far away to make out faces but close enough to be a message. We know where you live. We know about Sarah. Get away from the window. Marcus's voice had dropped to a whisper, the same tone he'd used in Cuban safe houses when patrols passed too close. Now, Sarah started to argue, but something in his posture stopped her. 23 years of quiet suburban fatherhood had just evaporated, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous, someone she'd never seen before. Who is that? She asked. But she was already backing toward the hallway, instincts inherited from a man who'd survived when 8 others hadn't. Marcus kept watching. The passenger door opened and a woman emerged, 50s, professional, moving with the controlled grace of someone comfortable with violence. She smoothed her coat and looked directly at the kitchen window, as if she knew exactly where he was standing. Then she smiled and started walking toward the front door. "Upstairs," Marcus said. "Pack a bag, only essentials." "Dad, what the hell?" The doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house like a funeral toll, civilized and polite, and absolutely terrifying. Marcus had spent decades answering that doorbell to neighbors bearing casseroles, students needing extra help, Girl Scouts selling cookies. Normal suburban interactions in a normal suburban life. This was different. This was the past coming to collect its debts. "Please," he whispered to Sarah, and the desperation in his voice finally broke through her reporter's skepticism. "Go upstairs. Give me 5 minutes to handle this." Sarah hesitated, torn between curiosity and the growing certainty that her father was someone she'd never really known. "If I hear shouting, you run. Back door, through Henderson's yard, to your car." Marcus pulled Tim's badge from his pocket, the metal warm from his body heat. After 61 years of carrying it like a talisman, like proof he'd survived when better men died, he finally understood why it had been sent back to him. "Promise me you'll run." The doorbell rang again, followed by polite knocking, professional courtesy with an undertone of inevitability. "Dad, I'm not leaving you. Promise me." Marcus turned from the window, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her step backward. Not anger or fear, but something colder. Calculation, the look of a man inventorying weapons and escape routes, measuring the tactical value of furniture and sight lines. "Whatever happens, whatever you hear, you get out of here." Sarah stared at him for another heartbeat, seeing the stranger wearing her father's face. Then she nodded and disappeared up the stairs, her footsteps quick and light on the hardwood. Marcus waited until he heard her bedroom door close before walking to the front hall. Through the window beside the door, he could see the woman waiting patiently on his porch. She'd positioned herself at an angle that gave her clear views of both entrances while keeping her back to open space. Professional. He opened the door. "Mr. Holloway?" She was younger up close, maybe 45, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "I'm Agent Catherine Reeves, Central Intelligence Agency." She held up credentials in a leather folder. "I wonder if we might have a conversation?" Marcus didn't move from the doorway. "About what?" "Your daughter's recent research into certain classified operations. I believe you received a package earlier today that might shed some light on her sources." The badge felt like it was burning through his shirt. "I don't know what you're talking about." Agent Reeves's smile widened slightly. "Mr. Holloway, I understand your reluctance to discuss sensitive matters, but your friend Timothy Chen has been very helpful in filling in some gaps. He's particularly concerned about protecting your family from any misunderstandings." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Hearing it from Tim himself had been shock enough, but having this woman use it so casually, so knowingly, meant the secret he'd carried for 6 decades was completely blown. "Tim's been dead since 1962, Marcus said carefully. "Has he?" Agent Reeves tilted her head slightly, studying his face. "That's interesting, because he called you less than an hour ago. From a phone we've been monitoring since 1963. The world tilted sideways. Everything Marcus thought he knew, every assumption he'd built his post-Cuba life around, crumbled like sand. If they'd been monitoring Tim's communications for 60 years, they'd known he was alive. Known and done nothing. Known and waited. "What do you want?" Marcus asked. "To clean up a mess that should have been handled decades ago," Agent Reeves said. "May I come in?" Marcus stepped back, allowing Agent Reeves into the hallway where Sarah had taken her first steps, where Linda had hung family photos that chronicled a life built on lies. The woman moved past him with practiced efficiency, eyes cataloging exits and sightlines while maintaining the facade of polite conversation. "Nice home," she said, settling into the living room as if she'd been invited for tea. "Very ordinary. You've done well creating a believable cover life, Mr. Holloway. It's not a cover. It's my life." Agent Reeves's laugh was soft and knowing. "Is it? Because according to our files, Marcus Holloway died in a sugarcane field outside Havana on November 15, 1962. along with 8 other FBI assets whose families received closed-casket funerals and commendations for their sacrifice. The room spun. Marcus gripped the back of Linda's favorite armchair, the one where she'd read bedtime stories to Sarah, where she'd dozed during late-stage chemo treatments. That's impossible. Timothy didn't tell you? Agent Reeves opened a manila folder, spreading photographs across the coffee table like tarot cards revealing an ugly future. How disappointing. I thought you two were close. The photos showed Marcus at various points over the decades, teaching at Jefferson High, walking Sarah to kindergarten, standing graveside at Linda's funeral. 61 years of surveillance, of being watched while believing himself free. You see, Mr. Holloway, or should I call you Agent Rivera? That is your real name, isn't it? Operation Mongoose was never about assassinating Castro. It was about creating perfect assets, men with flexible loyalties and tragic backstories, men who'd do anything to protect their new identities. The truth hit Marcus like incoming artillery. Every memory from that night shifted and reformed, revealing shapes he'd been too traumatized to see clearly. The mission briefing that kept changing, Tim's strange behavior in the days before deployment, the way the ambush had felt orchestrated, almost choreographed. We weren't FBI, Marcus whispered. Military intelligence, actually. Low-level operatives who'd become inconvenient. Agent Reeves traced one finger along a photo of Marcus teaching a Civil War lesson, students hanging on every word about battlefield strategies he'd learned firsthand in different wars. The Cold War required a special kind of soldier, men who could disappear completely, become American citizens so thoroughly that they'd forget their own origins. Marcus sank into Linda's chair, feeling decades of certainty crumble. The others, also alive, also relocated. Your entire team has been living productive American lives while occasionally feeding U.S. intelligence on Soviet activities. Teachers, businessmen, local politicians, all perfectly positioned to spot foreign infiltration. But Tim's badge was Timothy's idea. Sentimental fool thought you deserved to know the truth after your daughter started investigating. We disagreed. Agent Reeves gathered the photos with crisp efficiency. Which brings us to our current problem. Footsteps creaked overhead. Sarah, probably packing as instructed, but undoubtedly listening to every word. Marcus thought of all the times he'd taught her about American democracy, about truth and justice, and the courage to fight corruption. Beautiful lies wrapped around a core of betrayal. Sarah doesn't know anything, he said. Doesn't she? Her source has been feeding her classified documents. Someone with access to Operation Mongoose files. Someone who wants the truth exposed. Agent Reeves leaned forward, her pleasant mask finally slipping to reveal something cold and predatory. Tell me, Mr. Rivera, when you've spent 60 years believing yourself a patriot, how does it feel to learn you've been nothing but a useful fiction? The question was designed to break him, to strip away the last vestiges of the identity he'd built. Marcus Holloway, history teacher. Marcus Holloway, loving husband and father. Marcus Holloway, survivor of a mission that never existed. But as he looked at Agent Reeves's smug expression, something else surfaced. Not the grief she expected, but a cold anger that had been sleeping since 1962. You want to know how it feels? Marcus stood slowly, and for the first time since entering his home, Agent Reeves looked uncertain. It feels like I've been underestimated for 61 years. Mr. Rivera. My name is Marcus Holloway. I chose that name. I built this life. I raised a daughter who fights for truth because I taught her to. He stepped toward Agent Reeves, watching her instinctively reach for the weapon beneath her coat. And if you think discovering I was manipulated makes me weak, you clearly don't understand what you've really created. Agent Reeves's hand froze on her gun as understanding dawned. They hadn't made a compliant asset who'd break under pressure. They'd trained a killer, given him decades to perfect his cover, and now backed him into a corner with his daughter's life at stake. The thing about useful fictions, Marcus said quietly, is that sometimes they become more real than the truth. Agent Reeves's confident facade cracked like ice under pressure. Her hand remained poised over her concealed weapon, but Marcus could see the recalculation happening behind her eyes. Whatever psychological profile they'd built on him over 6 decades hadn't accounted for this moment. The instant when a man discovers his entire life has been theater, and chooses to rewrite the script. "Mr. Rivera," she said carefully, "you're upset. That's understandable. But let's not do anything that can't be undone." "Like murdering 8 patriots to maintain your cover story?" Marcus moved closer, and something in his posture made Agent Reeves's breathing quicken. "Or were they actors too? Was everything about that night a lie?" "Not everything." The admission slipped out before she could stop it. "The mission parameters were adjusted. But your team's sacrifice served a greater purpose." "Their sacrifice?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You mean their execution?" Upstairs, the floorboards creaked as Sarah moved toward the top of the stairs. Marcus could practically feel her listening, her journalist's instincts warring with his direct order to stay hidden. In 23 years of raising her, he'd never spoken to anyone the way he was speaking to Agent Reeves. Sarah was hearing her father's voice stripped of all pretense, all careful suburban politeness. "The Cold War demanded difficult choices," Agent Reeves said. "Your handler, Timothy, understood that. He's been one of our most valuable assets." "Tim was my partner, not my handler." But even as Marcus said it, memories were reshaping themselves. Tim's reluctance before the mission, his insistence on carrying the team's communication equipment, the way he'd positioned himself during the firefight, always with clear escape routes. "Timothy Chen has been CIA since 1959, Agent Reeves continued, her confidence returning as she watched doubt creep across Marcus's face. "His recruitment of you and the others was textbook. Identify military personnel with flexible morals and useful skills, then create circumstances that would make them grateful for new identities." The betrayal hit deeper than anything she'd said about Operation Mongoose. Tim, who'd shared foxholes with him in Korea. Tim, who'd been best man at his wedding to Linda. Tim, who'd called 3 hours ago claiming to want justice for their dead teammates. "Where is he now?" Marcus asked. "Safe, retired, living under his 4th identity in suburban Phoenix." Agent Reeves smiled at his expression. "Did you think you were the only one who got to play house? Timothy has 3 grown children who believe their father was a career insurance adjuster. His wife thinks his nightmares are from Vietnam." Sarah's footsteps moved closer to the top of the stairs. Marcus could see her shadow in his peripheral vision, and knew Agent Reeves could too. The woman's eyes flicked upward for just a moment, confirming that she was aware of their audience. "Here's what's going to happen," Agent Reeves said, settling back into her chair with renewed authority. "Your daughter is going to publish a retraction, citing insufficient evidence and unreliable sources. You're going to convince her that pursuing this story would be dangerous, for her and for others who depend on maintaining certain fictions. And then we're all going to return to our regularly scheduled lives. And if I refuse?" Then Sarah's investigation leads her to some very dark places. Places where young journalists have accidents. Car crashes, random muggings, gas leaks in poorly maintained apartments. Agent Reeves's voice remained conversational, but ice crept into her eyes. "We've protected your cover for 60 years, Mr. Rivera. That protection can be withdrawn." The threat crystallized everything for Marcus. For 6 decades, he'd believed his survival had been earned through luck, skill, and Tim's friendship. Now he understood it had been a leash, invisible but unbreakable. Every peaceful day, every small happiness with Linda and Sarah, had been permitted rather than chosen. But they'd made one crucial mistake. "You're absolutely right," Marcus said, and Agent Reeves relaxed slightly. "I've been living a useful fiction, playing a role so completely that I almost forgot who I really was." He moved to the mantelpiece where Linda's picture sat beside Sarah's college graduation photo. "But the thing about deep cover is that it changes you, becomes you, and sometimes the cover story develops motivations the handlers never anticipated. Mr. Rivera, Marcus Holloway, loves his daughter more than life itself. Marcus Holloway taught American history for 23 years because he believes in truth, justice, and holding powerful people accountable." Marcus turned back to face her, and Agent Reeves saw something in his expression that made her hand move toward her weapon again. "Agent Rivera might have been your puppet, but Marcus Holloway has spent decades learning how to protect what matters most. You're making a mistake." "No," Marcus said quietly, his eyes finding Sarah's shadow at the top of the stairs. I'm finally making the right choice. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats and promises. Outside, the sedan's engine continued running, a reminder that Agent Reeves hadn't come alone. Inside, 3 people who'd spent their lives building and maintaining lies finally faced the truth. The reckoning had begun. The silence shattered when Marcus moved toward the front door, his hand reaching for the deadbolt with deliberate precision. Agent Reeves was on her feet instantly, weapon drawn but not yet aimed, a professional courtesy that wouldn't last long. Step away from the door, Mr. Rivera. My name is Marcus Holloway. He turned the lock with a decisive click, cutting off her most direct escape route. And this is my house. The sound of Sarah's rapid descent down the stairs broke the standoff. She appeared in the living room doorway, overnight bag clutched in white-knuckled hands, her face a mixture of terror and determination that reminded Marcus painfully of Linda facing her cancer diagnosis. Dad, what the hell is happening? Agent Reeves swung her weapon toward Sarah with mechanical efficiency. Miss Holloway, you're going to sit down and remain very quiet while your father and I finish our conversation. Marcus stepped between the gun and his daughter without conscious thought. 6 decades of training overriding every suburban instinct he'd cultivated. You want me compliant? Then you keep her out of this. She's already in it. Her source, her investigation, her stubborn refusal to let sleeping dogs lie. Agent Reeves kept the weapon steady, but her eyes darted toward the front door as car doors slammed outside. Backup arriving, or perhaps they were simply tired of waiting. Last chance, Rivera. Call off your daughter's story, and everyone walks away clean. Clean? Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and bitter in the room where he'd taught Sarah to read, where Linda had planned birthday parties and Christmas mornings. There's nothing clean about any of this. You turned patriotic soldiers into unwitting assets, fed us a cover story so perfect we forgot our own names, then threatened our families when we got too close to the truth. Sarah's intake of breath was audible. Dad, who are you? The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, taking in the intelligence that had made her such a formidable journalist, the courage that had driven her to investigate dangerous stories, the moral clarity he'd spent 23 years nurturing without understanding its true cost. I'm exactly who you think I am, he said softly, and I'm everything they made me into. Both things are true. Agent Reeves's composure cracked slightly. You're romanticizing this, Rivera. You were small-time military intelligence with a talent for languages and wet work. We gave you purpose, direction, a life worth living. Marcus Holloway exists because we created him. You created the framework, Marcus agreed, moving incrementally closer to her position. But I built the life. I chose to love Linda, to raise Sarah with principles, to teach history because understanding the past matters. His voice hardened. And I chose to become someone who wouldn't let his daughter be threatened by government cowards hiding behind classified stamps. The front door rattled as someone tested the lock from outside. Agent Reeves called out without taking her eyes off Marcus. Status report? Perimeter secured, came the muffled reply. Witnesses in adjacent houses neutralized with standard cover story. We're clear to proceed. Marcus felt Sarah's sharp movement behind him and caught her arm before she could speak. Whatever standard cover story meant, it probably involved badges and official explanations that would satisfy suburban curiosity. But the word neutralize carried darker implications. How many neighbors did you have to silence to get to me? Marcus asked. As many as necessary. Mrs. Henderson was particularly observant for her age, kept detailed notes about unusual visitors to your address. Agent Reeves's smile was thin and professional. Don't worry, she's just sedated, for now. The threat to his elderly neighbor, who'd brought soup when Linda was dying, who'd watched Sarah's school plays and cheered at her graduation, finally broke the last of Marcus's restraint. Whatever psychological profile the agency had built on him, they'd missed the fundamental truth. 61 years of believing himself a survivor had created someone far more dangerous than any wet work specialist they'd originally recruited. Sarah, he said quietly, never taking his eyes off Agent Reeves. Remember what I taught you about the American Revolution? "Dad, this isn't the time for—" Sometimes tyranny wears a friendly face and carries legal documents. Sometimes the only choice left is resistance. Marcus shifted his weight, and Agent Reeves's weapon tracked the movement. "Remember that story? Mr. Rivera, you're about to make a decision that will destroy everything you've built. Your daughter's career, her safety, her future—" "My daughter's future," Marcus interrupted, "depends on her living in a world where truth matters more than convenient lies." In one fluid motion, Marcus dove toward Agent Reeves while simultaneously shouting, "Run!" to Sarah. The gun fired, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, but Marcus's decades of teaching high school had honed reflexes the agency's psychologists hadn't accounted for, the ability to move fast when young lives were at stake. The bullet shattered Linda's favorite lamp instead of finding flesh. Marcus's shoulder drove into Agent Reeves's midsection, sending them both crashing into the coffee table where surveillance photos scattered like fallen leaves. The reckoning had become a war. The gunshot's echo faded into chaos. Marcus and Agent Reeves crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs and overturned furniture, her weapon skittering across Linda's carefully maintained hardwood toward the kitchen. Sarah's scream pierced the air, not of terror but of fury, as she launched herself toward the gun instead of following his order to run. "Sarah, no!" Marcus grappled with Agent Reeves, muscle memory from 6 decades past flooding back as they fought for control. She was younger, trained, dangerous, but he was fighting for his daughter's life with the accumulated rage of a man who just learned his entire existence had been orchestrated. The front door exploded inward. 2 men in tactical gear swept through, weapons raised, moving with the fluid precision of professionals. Marcus rolled, using Agent Reeves as a shield, and felt her body jerk as her own backup hesitated to take the shot. "Stand down," one of them shouted. "Civilian in the crossfire." Sarah reached the gun first, her hands shaking as she raised it with the awkward grip of someone who'd only seen firearms in movies. "Everyone stop!" Her voice cracked, but the weapon remained steady enough. Just, everyone stop moving. The tableau froze. Agent Reeves pinned beneath Marcus, breathing hard but conscious. 2 tactical officers with perfect sight lines but no clear shot. Sarah wielding deadly force she'd never been trained to use, protecting the father she was still trying to understand. "Good girl," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying 23 years of pride and love and desperate hope. "Remember your training." "I never had training for this, Dad." "Yes, you did. Every history lesson about ordinary people standing against impossible odds. Every bedtime story about heroes who chose right over easy." Marcus slowly shifted his weight, keeping Agent Reeves immobilized while maintaining eye contact with his daughter. "You know who you are, Sarah. You know what matters." Agent Reeves coughed, tasting blood. This ends badly for everyone. You think killing federal agents solves anything? You think—" "Nobody's killing anybody," Sarah interrupted, the gun wavering slightly. "We're going to talk, like civilized people. Right now." The lead tactical officer, young, crew-cut, probably former military, lowered his weapon fractionally. "Ma'am, you need to understand. You're pointing a firearm at federal law enforcement officers. Put it down and we can work this out." "Federal law enforcement officers," Sarah repeated, her journalist's mind seizing on the phrase. "The same ones who've been lying to my father for 60 years? The ones who murdered 8 soldiers to protect some classified operation?" Her grip tightened. "I don't think so." Marcus felt something shift in the room's dynamic. The tactical officers exchanged glances, brief but telling. Doubt creeping in, perhaps, questions about what they'd been told. What they'd been ordered to do in a suburban living room that smelled of his late wife's lavender sachets and 23 years of ordinary American life. "Agent Reeves," Marcus said quietly, pressing his knee into her ribs just hard enough to remind her who had leverage. "Tell them the truth. Tell them what Operation Mongoose really was. Go to hell." "Dad," Sarah's voice carried a strange note, not fear now, but something approaching wonder. "I know who you are. I've always known who you are. You're the man who taught me that truth matters more than comfort. You're the man who spent every day showing me how to be brave." Marcus met his daughter's eyes across the wreckage of their living room. and saw Linda looking back at him, the same fierce determination, the same refusal to compromise on principle. Sarah had inherited more than her mother's eyes. She'd inherited the courage that had made Linda fight cancer with grace, that had made her face death without bitterness. "The story goes public," Sarah continued, addressing the room but keeping her focus on Marcus. "All of it. What they did to you, what they did to your team, how they've manipulated American citizens for decades, unless—" She paused, and Marcus could practically see her mind working through possibilities. "Unless they want to sit down and explain themselves, officially, on the record." Agent Reeves laughed bitterly. "You think we're going to give you an interview?" "I think," Sarah said calmly, "you're going to call your superiors and tell them that Marcus Holloway, not Agent Rivera, not whatever fiction you created, is offering them a choice: full disclosure in exchange for immunity, or a very public investigation into government overreach that reaches back to the Kennedy administration." The silence stretched long enough for Marcus to hear his neighbors' lives continuing outside. Lawnmowers, children playing, the ordinary sounds of a world that had no idea how close it was to learning that the Cold War had never really ended, only gone underground. Finally, Agent Reeves spoke. "You have no idea what you're unleashing." "Yes, I do," Marcus said, thinking of Linda's funeral, of all the quiet graves holding men whose families never learned the truth. "I'm unleashing exactly what this country was built on." The reckoning had become something else entirely. A reckoning with choice itself.